Focus on Ports, brought to you by Transnet National Ports Authority.
Welcome back. We've been chatting to Morwe, Chief Executive of Transnet National Ports Authority, and Jean-Pierre Labuschagne, Infrastructure and Capital Project PPP Specialist at Deloitte, about the challenges and opportunities Africa has to offer. I want to draw your attention to the port of Mombasa. For decades, it has been the major port on the African East Coast. Aside from Kenya, countries including Tanzania, Uganda and Sudan heavily rely on this port, which has led to detrimental congestion problems. In fact, the World Bank recently warned that if government doesn't solve this predicament, Kenyans may soon be the only ones making use of the port. Now, coming to you, Morwe, what problems are there on the African continent in terms of infrastructure and in terms of congestion that is similar to the one seen in Mombasa?
I think the problem is that capacity wasn't created ahead of demand. There aren't enough, for instance, berths in most of the ports, and that is the result of the congestion. But a number of ports are being constructed. If you look at Tanzania, even in Kenya itself, South Sudan, a number of ports are being constructed to deal with the problems around congestion.
Jean-Pierre, do you think there's enough will from African governments to sort out these problems of infrastructure?
I think so. I mean, there is a severe underspending, actually not just in Africa, but in the world on infrastructure. It's estimated that Africa needs to spend about $93 billion a year. Currently, Africa is only spending about 25. So I think there's a recognized demand. I think one of the challenges facing many governments is how to pay for this and to address the infrastructure, not just shortages, backlogs, but the aging infrastructure that I think worldwide is a growing problem of aging infrastructure.
The World Bank has raised the alarm on Kenya, and the World Bank has offered to assist. Do you think that's a viable plan to go to the World Bank?
I think the World Bank has a lot of value to add in countries, and I think a country just needs to understand what exactly it's getting from any of its partners, whether it's the World Bank or any other investment partner. One of the biggest challenges within East Africa is the discovery of oil, and I think that's going to put further pressure on not just the infrastructure but the ports, both for importing and exporting the materials.
As chair of PPP, Morwe, are you prepared with the discovery of oil, like Jean-Pierre is saying, that there is going to be further trade with Africa and there's going to be a further need for African ports to be used? Is PPP prepared for that?
Yeah, incidentally, PPP will be celebrating 40 years in November, and we're hosting a conference, and the theme of the conference is the economic integration of the continent using the port infrastructure, the port assets of the ports in Africa as a basis for that integration. Yes, some governments may not have the funding. I think at some point we will have to start a conversation around establishing Africa, fund or transportation fund for Africa to address the inability of other governments to pay for these projects.
You say you're going to start a conversation, but how are you going to try and resolve those problems? Do you think there are funding methods?
I think the basic problems that we need to start addressing problems around problems around customs, the time that it takes cargo to go cross border and so forth. We need to start with the basics, and then from there start dealing with the bigger issues.
And Jean-Pierre, what leads to those problems? So he mentions customs, and the time it takes for the cargo. Earlier we spoke about infrastructural development. What eventually leads to those problems?
I think it's often just a lack of coordination, sometimes within a country itself. Different rail might have a different agenda to road. I think ports are quite an interesting place because that's where a lot of different transportation lines converge. And if one is becoming more inefficient, then the other one grows, which eventually stresses the network as well. I think rail infrastructure is degraded in Africa, and so the road and trucking network has picked up that slack. but that has in turn caused other problems. So I think it's a coordination issue, and I think sometimes it's taking a bit of a step back and looking at more on a macro integration picture. It's not just about a port, it's how far do you almost push those port services into the economy rather than just stopping at the fence.
And do you think African governments have an understanding of that a port is not just a port that accepts cargo, a port is more than that for the country's economy?
I think there is, and I think there are a lot of private sector investors that are also willing to assist governments in addressing some of those constraints, not just capacity, but also from a funding and operations point of view. And it's managing that relationship between an operator, government, and a private party, I think, is going to be quite crucial to ensuring the development does take place in an equitable manner.
Earlier, Morwe, you mentioned that there are other ports that are in the pipeline that are under construction in the East African region. And Jean-Pierre right now just mentioned that when one grows, you might find that there's a slowdown of another. How would you try to address those problems? That there isn't a slowdown in one and then congestion suddenly maybe moves away from Kenya and moves to South Sudan?
I think one of the focus area of the Africa Union is the concept of corridors. You know, the northern corridor, the south corridor, and so forth. And I think alongside developing and improving efficiencies within the ports, we are also assisting, I think, as PERMESA, as Transnet, assisting in ensuring that we contribute towards rendering the corridors efficient in terms of the movement of cargo.
And you say rendering them efficiently. Have you started thinking about how that's going to happen?
Well, in terms of intermodal transport, if you look at the investments at Transnet, you know, for the market demand strategy, a large chunk of that investment is geared towards the rail sector, specifically general freight cargo. So I think if we keep on with such investments, whilst at the same time, you know, addressing investment at the ports itself, I think we are beginning to see the light in terms of those investments.
And Jean-Pierre, this problem's being solved?
I think so. I think there is a growth in there's certainly a serious attempt in solving problems, and I think we are slowly seeing the benefits by trade and investment in Africa growing.
Dao, you say it starts from Djibouti all the way down to South Africa. Now, those countries are vastly different. What challenges does PERMESA see when you're engaging in these talks, in these meetings?
I think the thrust of PERMESA is to allow the member states to learn from each other, to share information, bring through conferences expertise to solve problems that they may be having at their port or you know, across other ports. The challenges that we are currently having right now is we need to, as PERMESA, be able to deliver benefits to members. And I think what the concentration has been on is, you know, talking about problems rather than finding solutions to the problems. For instance, one of the big issues that we've identified at a PERMESA level is a problem that we talked about earlier on, the issues around customs delays and so forth. So now we need to start putting in place solutions for that. Another problem is information sharing. You know, if you look at Europe, for instance, the information in one port is available in another port. We need to start sharing information across the ports to enable cargo to move easily, you know, across one country to another.
And what are you doing to ensure that this is not just a South African or a Transnet National Ports Authority problem? You spearheading it, but you're working with other countries. How do you ensure that it doesn't end up on your shoulders and you end up doing all of the work?
No, I think the problems and challenges of PEMESA are not challenges and problems of Transnet. I think PEMESA is a coming together of port authorities around the continent. Specifically for East and Southern Africa, we've got a similar organization for Western Africa and for Northern Africa. And in November, we will see all those organizations coming together. We also have an association called the Pan-African Port Association. That will also be coming together with PEMESA. And I think I can guarantee that at that conference, the problems that need attention will be clearly outlined, and we would begin addressing those problems.
Jean-Pierre, is there light?
I think there is. I mean, 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. So I think there is a lot of hope. And I think this is also a decade of African growth and expansion. I think we do need to work with our neighbours to make sure that does happen.